Yesterday, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson laid out his roadmap for gradually easing lockdown. But according to some critics, it raised as many questions as it answered. I spoke to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, a short time ago. Matt Hancock, thanks for joining us. We've had a lot of messages from grandchildren to their grandparents on this show saying they really miss them. We can't quite work out when they're allowed to see them, though.
Yeah, I know it's really it's really sad, but the answer is not yet. You know, this disease does take from us more older people. It is a bigger killer, and so it is just really important that people follow those social distancing rules. It's okay to see, you know, people one-on-one at 2 meters outdoors. We think that is the safe way to do it. And I know that sounds very restrictive, but it's because, you know, we've got to keep control of this virus, and we don't want to go back to square one.
But that's where it gets awkward, because could you have so for example, could somebody appear on their own and meet their parent or grandparent in their grandparent's garden? Is that okay?
No, we're not proposing that, and we're saying that it needs to be in a public place.
In a park, then.
And the reason for in a park would be fine. The reason it's in a public place is because, you know, the temptation of meeting in a garden might be to go through the house, because often you have to get through the house to get to a garden. Some people's gardens aren't big enough. I mean, some people don't have gardens, and so this is the balanced view that we've come to. You know, the principles of social distancing are really clear. Everybody knows them. You know, stay 2 meters apart if at all possible. Outside is better than inside. Do the hygiene, wash your hands, keep surfaces clean. You know, the principles are clear. It then is, of course, complicated to translate that into lots of different individual rules. And on this one, this is the balance we've come to.
OK, but I understand that within the rules, I could bring my daughter to the park and let her out the car, and she could walk 100 yards and see my mum. That would be OK if they kept 2 meters apart, correct?
If your daughter's in your household, then yes.
Yeah, she's 16. But I mean, you tell us to exercise common sense, but we're getting into this enormously complicated menu of you can do this, you can't do that, you can go to a park, but you can't go to a garden. Why don't you just say it's up to you? Stay 2 meters apart and look after your parents and your grandparents. It's up to you.
Well, because there are limits to what it's safe for people to do. And, you know, we don't want to throw all this away. People have been, as you say, absolutely fantastic at exercising common sense. But there does need to be some structure to it. And that's the balance that we've tried to come to. I think people get that. People understand that. In the same way, people understand what stay alert means, right? It means follow these social distancing rules and do your best to control the spread of the virus.
It means stay alert and common sense mean that you're starting to trust us to make the right decisions. So don't then infantilize people by saying you can meet in a park but not in a garden. Leave it to them.
Well, no. Yeah, but that's not reasonable, Jeremy, because we've got to make sure that there's a framework in which people can operate in these difficult rules. So, of course, you can rail against one or any of the individual rules, and I understand that. But there has to be a balance here, and this is the balance that we've tried to strike. Look, everybody's trying to do their best. I think the public are trying to do their best, and we're trying to bring in a set of rules that both, you know, allow a bit more freedom where it's safe to do so, but not to set the whole thing back and set the R back to above 1, so that the virus is spreading, and the consequences of that, which are that, you know, we get back to the position where there's a risk of the NHS being overwhelmed.
I understand. We all understand that. Let's just go to the workplace now. People are actively encouraged to go back to work. On Sunday, we were told Monday. On Monday, we were told Wednesday, but we'll leave that to one side. Actively encouraged. What happens if you're called by your boss and told to come in and you say, I'm not going to because it's not safe? Is that common sense? Is that okay?
Well, the employers need to put in place the guidance for safer working and for safe working in the workplace. We're setting out those details later today. We've done an awful lot of work on them, not only with employers, but also with trade unions. The trade unions describe them as a step in the right direction. So we're making progress on how to do that.
Okay, but you've jumped them. You've jumped them because you said Wednesday. So people are thinking, or on Sunday you said Monday. So people are thinking they've got to go back to work, but they haven't got the measures in yet. So are they within their rights? I'm asking you again to say, I'm not coming into the workplace. Can they do that?
Well, employment law hasn't changed, but people need to put these measures into place and to protect people as much as is reasonably possible in the workplace. That's what the new guidelines for safe working are all about.
So you can't be sacked for refusing to come into work.
Well, everybody's got to work together. That's one of the big principles of this whole crisis: is everybody's got to work together and behave reasonably, and that's what we've seen the vast majority of people do.
If I'm displaying common sense and staying alert, and I accept your argument that we've got to be trusted to understand that, I'm going to get into work by bus, let's say, and I arrive at the bus stop and there's a queue, and I can tell it's not a socially distanced queue, and the bus is going to be crowded. I should turn around and go home, shouldn't I?
Yes, we don't want overcrowded public transport.
So how do I get into work then?
Well, the first thing is people shouldn't use public transport unless they absolutely have to, precisely to leave the public transport for the people who really need it, like the person in your example. The second thing is that public transport should not be too packed. In fact, it should be pretty, socially distanced on public transport is important, and we're bringing forward further guidelines around that. Transport for London put some out yesterday. So that is a challenge. We also want people to go to work at different times so that the rush hour is less of a thing. And we want people to cycle. I know you're a big cyclist, Jeremy. We want people to cycle far more. And there's never been a more pleasant time to cycle because there's so little traffic on the roads.
Well, fair comment. And London certainly is flat and you can cycle almost anywhere in London. But outside London, it's harder, isn't it? And I noticed your colleague John Redwood today called for mass building of car parks to deal with more journeys by car.
Well, I think that first things first, it is true that the more public transport used in London and some of the other major conurbations like Manchester than in most parts of the country. Only about 15% of people get to work by public transport. And we do want as many of people as possible to be able to get to work without using public transport. Public transport is a big challenge in tackling the coronavirus because it is somewhere that is higher risk. Hence, also, we're proposing that people could wear face coverings on public transport. Yet, for some people, there is no alternative. So it's not like we can just shut it down. This is why things like cycling are really important. And we're putting a huge amount of money into cycle lanes and to making cycling easier. And by the way, cycling is very good for your health as well, both your mental health and your physical health. So all of these things are dealing with great big real world challenges where we're doing the best we can, and we need the public to exercise their common sense as well as so many people have been over the last 6 weeks.
One more quick one, if I may. Our viewer, Stuart Humphrey, wants to know if we feel it is unsafe to let our children go to school on the 1st of June, can we keep them at home?
Well, we're not going to penalise people if they do choose to keep their children at home in this period. But we wouldn't. Education is very important, and we wouldn't have said that schools can open in the phased and very, very careful way from the 1st of June, contingent on the things going well between now and then, and the number of new cases continuing to come down. We wouldn't have said that unless it was safe to do so. Having said that, we're not going to put in place any penalties if people do choose to keep their children at home.
Will teachers wear masks?
Well, the evidence is that isn't necessary because these face coverings are important. According to the science is actually quite weak on this, but we're proposing them for places where you're in an enclosed indoor space, but that is where you're with people for a reasonable amount of time, like 15 to 20 minutes, but with people you don't normally see. If you're with people for a long period of time, like a day in a classroom, then a face covering won't help you and won't protect you. But for that medium period of time, especially with people you don't see again, like on public transport or in a shop perhaps, then that's where face coverings can make a difference. But I'm also really clear it's face coverings, not face masks, because we need to protect the face masks for the healthcare workers, social care workers who really need them.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock, thank you so much for your time, and we love the picture of the Queen behind you.
God save the Queen. Very good to talk.
Take care.